Hello and welcome to the meeting of the Board of Directors of Bellevue School District. Today is Thursday, August 4th, and the time is 4:35 p.m. At this time, we will do roll call.
Jane Aris.
Christine Chu. Seema Sarafan.
Carolyn Watson.
And as today is August 4th, we have a Board Director, Joyce Shuey, who is on vacation. So we will go forward, and our Superintendent.
Lieutenant Art Jarvis.
Okay, at this time, Executive Director Harrison, I know we have a staff member that you will introduce.
We do, President Sarafan, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Miss Karen Walters over here. Karen is, every organization has their unsung heroes, and Karen is one of ours. She quietly goes about doing great work. She's the support coordinator for the teaching and learning department. She's been with the district for quite a while, but she'll tell you a little bit about herself later. So I invite Karen to come up and lead the pledge.
Is it on? Okay. Are we doing the pledge first?
We are, and then we will do the land acknowledgement, and then we'd love to hear a little bit about you, Karen.
Okay.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish people who have reserved treaty rights to this land, specifically the Duwamish and Snoqualmie tribes. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We reflect on the historic context that brings us to reside on this land and accept responsibility to interrupt erasure. We commit to an ongoing partnership with the Snoqualmie tribe as we listen to, learn from, and lead with their guidance.
Thank you. So, Karen, we'd love to hear from you,
Okay.
however you'd like to use the time. But as Executive Director Harrison said, you're a valued staff member, and we love the chance to hear what you do and anything you want to share.
Okay. I'm Karen Walters, and my husband and Mark and I moved to Bellevue in 1978 after graduating from WSU. Go Cougs. In 1982, we started a family. We raised 3 children who are now 40, 37, and 33. They attended Newport Heights, Tyee, and Newport. All 3 attended colleges in Southern California, in the southern area, and graduated in different fields of science, all while playing water polo for their colleges. I started working for the Bellevue School District in 1997. I had previously stayed home with the kids and volunteered way too much. I was originally hired as a one-to-one para, and the following year was hired as a tech specialist for Newport Heights Elementary. Apple IIe's were the choice computers of that year. As I aged and printers got heavier and computers became plentiful, I applied for a support position in the teaching and learning department at the central office. I have been there for 4 years supporting Executive Director Sharon Couts, her team of directors, and close to 20-some developers. I have forced my rusty tech skills by learning OneNote that I use daily as a budgetary communication tool between myself and this rather large team. I am fortunate to work with all of them and to be around such creativity and higher knowledge. I have thoroughly enjoyed my time as a Bellevue employee and as a resident.
Thank you so much, and thanks for coming today to share that. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So we thank you again. And we're happy over the summer to have this chance. As you know, we normally throughout the school year are hearing from students and want to take the chance over the summer to be able to hear from some of the many staff members who serve us and whom we value. So at this time, we're going to turn to item 1.5, our acknowledgements. August 9th, which is next Tuesday, is the International Day of the World's Indigenous People. August 12th is International Youth Day. Both of those are important for our community. I now go to item 1.6 and ask, I this time would move for approval of agenda and ask if there's a second to the motion.
A second.
Is there any discussion?
Will there be any discussion of the budget tonight or nothing new on that? I'd like to know if there were any updates or anything like that.
I don't believe, there's nothing planned. The only budget item we had was for the 5.3, which was our board budget. So there's not anything. I think if there's nothing net new to the budget and no plan for it, but if you had something, you could always bring it up and the superintendent could note it for a future response.
Thank you.
And just so, as you know, I think, but I'll put it on the record for others, our meeting in 2 weeks, August 18th, is when we would be approving the budget. So, okay, so at this time, if there's no other discussion or questions, I'd ask a vote on approving tonight's budget. So all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, hearing no opposition, the agenda passes. So now we go to the consent agenda. I move to approve the consent agenda and ask for a second.
Oh. Sorry, I was having password trouble. Okay, I wanted to pull one thing out of the consent agenda.
I think what you're supposed to do is we need to second it and then you pull
Okay.
out what you want as part of
Okay, I'll
discussion.
second it.
All right, and then for discussion, what item would you like to pull out?
The report on the teachers out of their endorsements.
I believe, and our general counsel can correct me, because I'd like to make sure I'm doing this right. At this time, pulling out item 2.5 from the consent agenda, leaving what remains. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
I would also like to make one cheerful comment about how much I like to see that there is a student trip for a non-cut sport, which is very sense of belonging and community team building. So I just wanted to say how much I appreciate that. And then, yes.
Excellent. Okay, so all those in favor of approving the consent agenda with the modification of removing item 2.5, please say aye.
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 Director Chu, I didn't hear you, sorry.
Aye.
Okay, so the consent agenda passes. I think we now hear about item 2.5. So if Director Watson, if you'd like to discuss that.
I just had a question about it because I noticed that there were a whole lot of people who were teaching the virtual academy, like 9 people, who where it said, instead of endorsement, it said permit. And I just wondered if what that meant in terms of qualifications. And if it just seems strange that they were all concentrated in that one place. And I wanted to be reassured that we're not giving our least qualified teachers to the virtual academy.
Okay, so that sounds like a question that might be appropriate for the superintendent, Jeff Thomas, and possibly
yeah,
others.
I'm sorry I wasn't available to ask that question on Monday.
No, I think it's okay. So
I would ask Dr. Collins if
Okay.
she can answer.
all right.
I know all of our teachers for the virtual academy are highly qualified, so maybe there is a specific qualification for the online learning that I'm not aware of. So I would have to ask Jeff Thomas for that answer.
So in terms of circling back, maybe we pull that item 2.5 over to the next. Would there be an issue with pulling that to the agenda for the 18th? Okay, if not, we'll do that. And in the meantime, maybe we can get more clarification. Director Chu?
And I will weigh in that I did ask a question about this as well offline. And I asked why we're approving something after the fact, because it's not much of an approval after the fact. And apparently that, according to the Human Resources Department, that is the expectation from the state, that we would approve it after the fact. So I think it's making sure that someone sees what's happening, or, but I'm not entirely clear. So when we get clarification, I'd like to get a little bit more clarification on that, if that's just tradition or if the state is actively asking us to do that approval post fact.
I think that
opposed
might
to-
be something that I was getting a message in between, Director Chu. I'm wondering, Shannon, our general counsel, do you have an answer on, certainly on the OSPI piece of it? As
Yeah.
well, so some of the,
Yes.
I mean, what's behind some of these questions is both qualifications as well as, is there a different standard? Is there a different lens? And then I think also here behind that, how is it that it works out that we're actually approving after the fact versus beforehand? So if you can illuminate either or both.
Yes. Annually, school districts are required to report to OSPI any identification of staff members who are either working outside of the endorsement area or who have had any sort of issue with respect to teaching in an area in which they are not certificate holders, or where there might be an issue with respect to the class being coded correctly for what the teacher's qualifications are. It is in fact correct that OSPI asks for this information after the school year at issue was completed, and asks for verification that school boards are made aware of the individuals who are teaching outside of endorsement area. With respect to the entry for virtual academy teachers, I want to identify that what's listed there is that these are not district employees, but still reported as district teachers. And this may be because they are individuals who are certified in other states and who were in the process of receiving Washington state endorsement during the course of the 2021-2022 school year. So that's where you may see permit and certificate. An initial permit is, they're just different terminologies that are associated with initial certification and permature issued to teachers. It's terminology that OSPI uses is actually permit, and then you have an initial permit, and then you have a residency permit. And so it may just simply be how different certification was issued. I think that Assistant Superintendent Thomas and his staff would have more specifics on that, but I believe that this may be a reflection of the process of partnering with Director Collins may have to, or Deputy Superintendent Collins may have to remind Edgenuity prior to the formation of the Bellevue School District specific program. So to me, this appears to be teachers who were providing services through Edgenuity before the Bellevue School District created its own virtual program, which was renamed at the last board meeting. So that is what I can tell from this report based on my experience, including having been in Mr. Thomas's position in another district as well. So my read of this is that the virtual academy teachers that were working outside of endorsement, or where there's indication about permit issuance, is that these were Edgenuity teachers who were employed in other states, as opposed to teachers who work at the new Bellevue online program that was started later into the school year.
Okay, I think that just in the interest of time, we've got more questions. The main question I have is, can we carry this over to another meeting, or is there a requirement that this be passed tonight?
Typically speaking, there is a time period where there is an expectation on the Human Resources Department to submit this information to OSPI. I do not know if the timeline that has been given to the district's Human Resources Office requires this to be approved at this meeting or at the next meeting.
All right, there is a question from Director Chu. Why don't we hear the question, but we might take some of the answers down the road? Let's
Yeah, down the road is fine. I have a question and a suggestion. The suggestion is if we could just table this until after we have a break, and that way if somebody needs to check if we need to do anything tonight, we can. Otherwise, we could just table it until next meeting. But the other question that I have is, I think that the fact that we're noticing this, I think this is an annual requirement. I don't think it's brand new this year. And I think it speaks to the fact that we're getting, that HR did a great job really reporting this out clearly and bringing it to our attention. The question that I didn't ask and I should have earlier, and I'd like to know, is just, is this number of teachers out of certification area higher than usual? And does it speak to any pending issues with availability of teachers for hiring and for making sure that we're whatever? And then to tag on to what Carolyn was asking about, I'd also like to know if there's any requirements or standards that we need to or can be putting on to our online learning program to make sure that our students participating in that are getting the highest quality instruction that they can. And if there was any issue with that this year, I mean, sometimes there is no issue with that anyway. So those are just questions about availability and our ability to make sure that we get the best for our kids. Thank
Okay,
you.
I suggest right now we move forward. We have a lot of people waiting, our new administrators, and we'd love to be able to welcome them. So at this time, we'll move forward. In the meantime, I think on the suggestion of finding out about the timing of OSPI, whether this can be carried forward or not, let's go forward. So I will ask maybe our general counsel or Deputy Superintendent Collins to inquire about the timing, and then as we move forward in our agenda. So Superintendent Jarvis, we have an update from you, and I think it's going to include an introduction of some of the people in our audience today.
Thank you. I'd like to make a quick note of 3 items. Last meeting, there was a question. We didn't know for sure the status of our rocketry. We had been visited by our rocketry teams from Newport High School after they took first and second in the nationals. So I'd like to read a quick announcement that's been shared with others before. The student rocketry team from Newport High School recently placed second in the International Rocketry Challenge held at the Farnborough International Air Show. The students who were representing the United States finished behind Team Japan, whose win marked the first time an all-girls team claimed the top prize. Teams from France and the United Kingdom placed 3rd and 4th behind Newport High School. So certainly our congratulations to them and the follow-up and an excited bunch. Equally exciting is to note that we congratulate one of our teachers, Shane Monroe, who is the regional teacher of the year. Shane is an elementary educator teaching 5th grade at Wilburton Elementary and is known to be a powerful voice for equity, inclusion, and student-focused decision-making. Shane collaborated with his peers to craft, promote, and implement an adaptable, inclusive curriculum for Black Lives Matter at School Week. He partnered with his grade level team to elevate the bullying prevention unit, crafted additional interactive lessons designed to enhance student relationships, increase self-advocacy, promote kindness through leadership, and we congratulate Shane on that achievement. I would also note that while we often hear about some of the athletics and the science and math, we have an Interlake High School student who has won a National Poet Prize. Diane Sun, a student at Interlake High School in Bellevue, was selected from the West Region. Students from across the country have been named National Student Poets, an honor presented by the National Student Poets Program. They will serve 1-year programs as poetry ambassadors, giving talks and presiding over workshops and other programs. 5 high school students, including Diane, have received a prize that will enable them to share their passion for poetry in their communities and beyond while receiving a $5,000 cash award. I just have to comment, I think that's absolutely spectacular and not something we see Lastly, I would note that on August 22nd and 24th, we will be running the annual Summer Institute for Educators. They will have an opportunity to attend a variety of sessions focused on instruction, student well-being, technology, curriculum resources. To meet the needs of educators, and the topics will be presented in various formats, including in-person at Chinook Middle School, virtual through Teams, and others which are asynchronous. So school is coming fast is the main item there. It is coming, which then leads to, I think, one of my main activities today, and that's to proudly have the introduction of our new administrators in the school district. And to begin that, I'm going to introduce one of who's not a new administrator, but he's in a new position as part of the reorganization. So if Dr. Kelly Aramaki will step forward, I will introduce Dr. Aramaki as the Assistant Superintendent. And Dr. Aramaki has been asked to be the point person basically on strategic initiatives and student services and staff engagement, specifically taking a look at our choice programs, our innovation programs, and helping advance that agenda. So Dr. Aramaki, congratulations on your new title and new program, and we thank you for that, taking that effort on. Would you in turn introduce some of the people who will be working with you and have joined at the district level?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. All right. I'm excited to introduce some of our new administrators. We're going to do it central office first, and then elementary, and then secondary. And so if we could get all the new central office administrators to come forward, we'll just have you kind of line up here in front of the board so that they can see your eyes better. I had the privilege of spending about 4 days with many of these new administrators this summer, getting to know them. And some of them are moving up from different positions in the district, and others we have recruited from all over the place. I mean, when we have people from all over the country, and we're just excited about what they're going to be bringing to the Bellevue School District. And so what I'm going to do is, if it's okay, I'm going to start over here with you, Aaron. Just have you introduce yourself, the role that you're in, and then if you're from a different role in Bellevue, just where you came from. And if you're from out of the state or out of the area, we'd love to just have you tell them where you're from. Okay? All right.
Hi, I'm Aaron Miller, and I have been in the Bellevue School District for 20 years, most recently as principal of Odell. And my new position is Director of Schools, focused on secondary, and I'll be working closely with Dr. Siegworth.
Hi, I'm Kelly Taylor, and I actually started student teaching in Bellevue School District, a long time ago, 30-some years ago. And I recently was working as a director in teaching and learning, and now I'm moving over to school support for elementary, working with Heather Sanchez.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Jorgensen, joining you from the land of 10,000 lakes, Minnesota. So going out towards that perfect spot in the north or the Pacific Northwest. I'll be joining you as the new Director of Special Education, replacing Kristen Callisto.
Hi, my name is Melissa Macias, and I've been with the district for the last 4 years. I was recently the school principal at Phantom Lake, which I will be missing the community. And now I'm joining the teaching and learning as a director for middle schools.
Hi, my name is Dale Stewart. I am the Director of Special Education Secondary, and I hail from New Orleans, Louisiana, but I'm moving here from Missouri.
Good evening. My name is Drew O'Connell, and I am the new Director of Student Life in the Bellevue School District. I come to Bellevue from Seattle Public Schools, most recently as a principal and assistant principal there. But I'm a native Northwesterner and glad to be in home.
Hello, everybody. I'm Tina Bogucharova, and this is my 15th year in the district. When I started, I was a ELL facilitator, and then developer, and then ITCL, and then assistant principal, and now principal. My proudest work in my life, it has to be starting Jingmei Elementary School. As you know, we saw it from the grounds up. Very proud to start that school, and now I'm going to be the new Director of Teaching and Learning in the elementary levels, working with Melissa and Sharon, so happy to be here.
Great. Who's not here is Kristen Tinder, who is our new Director of Advanced Learning and Innovation. And so you'll have a chance to meet her, but she is on a much needed vacation this week. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Congratulations.
All right, and then I will invite up Heather Sanchez. And if our new administrators for elementary schools could come on up, we will do our elementary next.
All right, we got everybody up here? Down. All right, members of the board, it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our new elementary level leaders. Some of them are coming from places far, far and away. Some of them are coming from their own building, and they're just promoting up to a new level. So it's such an honor to have such an incredible group coming in. I'm very excited about this school year. I'm excited about the diversity of the group and the robust skill set. So I'm just going to start over here with you, Estella. If you would just introduce yourself, what your current role is, what your previous one was.
Hi, my name is Estella Wiegand, and most recently I was the AP at Sherwood Forest, and for the fall I'll be the principal.
Hello, my name is Michael Elka. This is my 4th year in Bellevue. For 3 years, I was the ITCL at Sherwood Forest, and I'm going to be the assistant principal there, working with Estella this year.
Hello, I'm Betty Nan. Previously, I think this is my 16th year. Previously, I was the assistant principal at Tye Middle School, and right now I'm going to go back home as the principal of Medina Elementary.
Hi, my name is Brooke Garcia. I was serving as the assistant principal at Clyde Hill Elementary, and this year I will be serving as the principal.
Hi, my name is Marcus Johnson. I come from TU from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, by way of Jackson, Mississippi. I was a principal in Chester Community Charter Schools, and I will be the principal at Phantom Lake Elementary.
Hi, good evening. My name is Liz Mizrahi, and I will be the principal at Stevenson Elementary. Previous to that, I was the assistant principal at Stevenson Elementary.
Hi there, I'm Katarina Pulaski Johnson. I'm coming to you from Colorado, the Denver area, and this year I'll be serving as the assistant principal at Bennett Elementary.
Hi, I'm Katie Weiland. This will be my 10th year in the district. I've been a teacher previously in the district, and then this year I'll be the AP at Medina.
Hello, my name is Allison Hook, and I'm going to be the assistant principal at Clyde Hill Elementary School, and I'm coming from Vancouver Public Schools down in Vancouver, Washington, where I was a 4th grade teacher.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anisha Grigsby, and I just finished my 8th year in the district. I spent 7 of those at lovely Sammamish High School, but coming into this year, I will be the principal at Woodridge Elementary.
My name is Dongmei Tan. I'll be the acting principal for Jinmei Elementary this year. This is my 10th year in the Bellevue School District. And 10 years ago, I was hired by Heather and Tina at Ardmore when we started the dual language program. And then I was a classroom teacher, ITCL, and then a mentor, and then a dean of student. Last year, I was the assistant principal. Happy to be here. And I'll be working with my new acting AP to be hired soon, right?
Wow. Thank you, elementary leaders. I'm so excited about this crew, all of them. But all right, so Dr. Patty Segworth is going to come up and introduce our new secondary administrators.
And we're just going to take 1 nanosecond to ask Jess, can you possibly adjust the, maybe what shows right now, the slide item 3, maybe we move that out so that we're trying to adjust so that Director Aris can actually see more. So if there's a way to modify that, that would be appreciated. Thank you. Thank you. Patty, go ahead.
Great, thank you. My distinct pleasure. Come on up, middle and high, don't be shy. I spent enough time with you to know you're not shy. So coming before you, it's an honor to present to you our middle school and high school building leaders. We have some from in-district, out of district, in-state, and out of state. I'll let you start, Melissa.
Hi there, my name is Melissa Slater. I've worked in Bellevue for 25 years. And most recently, I was lucky enough to intern at Stevenson Elementary and serve as Bellevue's National Board Program Coordinator. This coming year, I'll be one of the assistant principals at Tyee Middle School.
Good evening. My name is Lanita Hill. I will be an assistant principal at Sammamish High School. I'm coming from the Seattle Public Schools District, where I was a special education teacher in several different leadership roles within the school via Cincinnati, Ohio prior to that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Joe Potts, and I'll be serving as the interim principal at Odell Middle School. And before that, last year, I was a school principal in the Peninsula School District.
Good evening. I'm Harlan Warrior. I will be serving as assistant principal at Newport High School. Prior to that, I spent 5 years as assistant principal and athletic director at Renton Schools. I come to you from the state of Oklahoma.
Hi, good evening. My name is Devanya Bryant. I go by Dee, so please feel free to call me Dee. This year, I have the honor of serving as the principal of Tillicum Middle School. I'm coming from the state of Maryland, where I served as an assistant principal. Thank you for the opportunity.
Good evening. My name is Devin Barrett. I will be joining Mr. Warrior as an assistant principal at Newport High School this year. I'm coming to you from Lake Washington School District, most recently as a dean of students at Redmond High School.
We have one that was unable to join us tonight, and I want to share with you that Heather Snookle. You may recall meeting Heather years ago, but she used to be in our district. She served in Seattle School District the last 3 years as an assistant principal at elementary, and she's back as an assistant principal at Tyee Middle School. Heather Snookle.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you to all of you who came tonight. It's a pleasure to see all of you. Thank you.
Can I just add, I think it's always heartening to see folks who want to be leaders in the education space. But at this time in particular, when there have been so many challenges and so many people are looking for space to go outside of the space, to wonder if this is the space they want to stay in, to be dedicated to our kids, I think it's a real tribute to these individuals and to our district for nurturing so many of them and for welcoming all these new folks in from places where we'll hopefully get lots of great new ideas and lots of great experiences. So I'm really grateful to everyone who's here and who is committed to helping kids and being part of this work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and well said. If there's any other comments, jump in.
I would just like to say this was really fun to meet you all, and many of you who have been with the district, I know, and I can remember my different connections with you. Like, I think Kelly Taylor probably doesn't remember. I was at Stevenson when she was there. But there's more of those kinds of things. But and then the states that you all are from, I am a former Maryland resident, and I look forward to chatting about that. And I have been a tourist in Oklahoma and Minnesota and Missouri and Louisiana. So when we come around to the schools, I'll be sure to chat. But welcome.
Yeah, and I'm just going to say, I lived in Maryland, but I have to say saying Missouri sort of says you've been around. So anyway, thank you. We do get around as board directors. So I just want to say I share the enthusiasm and respect for all of you. So thank you. Director Aris?
Oh, yes, I would like to chime in there and say thank you very much for wanting to be in this space and continuing to support our students in this leadership position. I apologize, I cannot see the faces of all of you because I just see a tiny little icon with a lot of bodies. So hopefully at some point I will be able to meet all of you in person. Again, I apologize, I could not be there in person today.
Well, I'll just say Director Aris is apologizing, but she has a daughter who's a national cricket champion. So, kudos to her. So nicely done.
Well, thanks.
Okay,
unfortunately, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, since you brought that up, the reason I am not there is I've been very busy trying to deal with how to get my daughter back home because she unfortunately contracted COVID from another Claire. And so she has been stuck in another state in a hotel. So my apologies.
Okay, well, we're grateful that you joined us for tonight's meeting. We thank all of you who joined. You're welcome to join us for the next hour plus in our meeting, but we will not at all be offended if you all leave at one time. So we won't be hurt. We understand, and welcome again. Thank you. We'll just get a 1-minute break while I confirm about public comment. Thank you. Okay, so we go forward. We do not have any public commenters, and we've confirmed that multiple times. So that takes us past item 4, and we are now at item 5, which is board business. So we have on the phone with us Hank Harris, and I will just say that just consistent with where we've been, but mainly to just share in another public forum. We've been talking about this in several board planning sessions that are online and open to the public. But for one more time, what we're going to be doing this year on the advice of our search firm, Human Capital Enterprises, is a variation on the type of search we're doing, the purpose of which is to be able to attract superintendents of a range of experiences. And the key piece is that in our finalist stage, we're going to have a different format. And I will do my best to try to summarize it, and Hank can jump in to either correct me or to add as needed. But I think the plan is to go down a different variation at the very end where we don't actually announce who the 3 finalists are, knowing that many sitting superintendents typically will not engage or put their name into a process if doing so means their current employer is going to know that they're looking for another position. So the value of doing this is essentially that we will get a broader and more inclusive superintendent search, both applicants who are perhaps assistant superintendents who typically will engage regardless, as well as those who are sitting superintendents who are disinclined usually to go down that path. Doing that, though, allows us to also do something that augments the engagement of our community. And so HCE in the past has, as they recommended to us, has had a panel of perhaps 15 community members representing a cross-section of a community, be kind of in close partnership with the board, looking at the applications, the content, and making a recommendation as representatives of the community at that final stage. At the request of this board, we asked HCE to go a step farther. We didn't want 15. We asked, could we have as many as 60 people in 4 groups of 15 each? And they've agreed to that. They've modified it. And more recently, the modifications went a bit further as we asked them, what other things can we do to ensure that we communicate effectively with our community? And one of their suggestions is and offers is to keep the survey open approximately another month and have continuing communications throughout the process to let community members know if they have a question, it could be answered, high-level questions answered by staff, more complex questions if needed, answered by our consultants. But these are ways to ensure that in addition to the sessions we had, the survey we have, and the focus groups we will be having that will essentially comment on and give us feedback on our leadership profile, that we at all stages are engaging with the community. So this time, I think we're simply just sharing that. There'll be more communications on this, but we have Hank Harris on the screen from a time zone that's probably 10 hours behind ours, maybe more, but he's here anyway to maybe say a few words.
Thank you, Director Serafin. Actually, I think I'm 5 hours ahead. So even though it looks like it's still late out, it's 10:15 here in Greenland. PM, that would be. I think you framed it really well. We're really excited to bring what we think we haven't opened the vacancy yet, but we anticipate that we will see some really great interest by established leaders of school districts who are excited about the opportunity that presents itself in Bellevue. And I think you framed it really well. So the only thing I think I would add in terms of what that looks like is you mentioned that we typically would bring in about 15 community members, and in Bellevue, we're going to quadruple that. And we're excited to get to work with 60 stakeholders to be determined later in the fall or early winter, who will dive deeply into this process and be really learned around the candidates and the finalists in particular, and be able to provide feedback that we think is going to be really deep, really valuable to the board, and representing a very diverse group of stakeholders to offer that I think will be really cogent and really insightful thoughts for the board to consider as the board ultimately makes their decision.
Great, so thank you. I think we have director discussion later, but we do have a few minutes now. So if there's anything that any board director wants to say or comment on at this point, go ahead. I know we've discussed this as a board since basically April, May, but in several sessions, and I think have arrived through evolution at this landing space. But if there's anybody who wants to say anything, Director Chu?
Yeah, thanks. So first, I do want to call out that I want to make a correction, because I think that first, I think that we're going down a road that is in the best interest of our district, in the sense that we are going to not only involve community, but find deep ways to do that through the participation of these 60 or so participants in the process, plus of course our board of directors, plus the involvement of the entire community in constructing the profile for our superintendent, and another round of feedback into that this fall in September that people will be invited to participate in. I want to correct the impression that we had in the past only involved 15 people. I think that is entirely incorrect. We had multiple groups who met over the course of a day with each of the superintendents, and each group gave us feedback. We did also have one community group that was a cross-section of community, and we also had public forums which anyone could attend and submit questions both live and virtually. They were able to submit the questions, not real time, but they could submit questions too, and the events were streamed. So we have in the past done a lot of work to involve our community. What we're doing that's different this time, and I think it's really important to take a moment and understand it, because this is why we're making some changes. It's not just to protect the adults in the system so that they'll apply for this job. It's also to make some differences in how people participate in the process. We really want to make sure that the people participating have an opportunity to discuss deeply their participation, and not just 15 selected folks, but the whole 60 will have that rich conversation opportunity. And in the past, I think that rich conversation opportunity has been more limited to staff than it has to the broader stakeholder groups. So we'll be adding a larger number of students, parents, and community members to that discussion opportunity, which is really exciting. Additionally, I don't think we have it tonight, because I think this work is hot off the presses, but I believe we're going to get a kind of an outline of when communications are going to come out. I'd like to verify that that's correct, that there will be things people can look forward to from now all the way through the end of this search, where they'll they'll be on top of what's going on just because some of the candidates aren't named. But we're working really hard to find the right compromise points, but to not compromise the participation of our community, the focus on our students, and our focus on ensuring that our participation broadly represents our community and not just pockets of it. So I just wanted to call those things out because they're very important to me and to, I think, a lot of folks in our community.
Yeah, the reference to 15 was HCE's use in the past. So in the past, they used 15. We asked them to do, yeah. Option B originally was 15. So that's what I was
Yeah,
talking
sorry,
about.
I thought they were talking
Okay,
about our district.
That's okay, but I think your broader point is a really good one, which is why are we doing this? And it's to elevate our process. And I think the value is the value is really that if you get, and we know we will, a cross section of our community in that 60-person representation, then what they get is an opportunity to kind of look under the hood and sort of see the references, the recommendations, the actual resume, a lot of the information that you don't necessarily present in a public arena. And so I think there's a value there. And I think what I'm really impressed about for our board is that each and every one of us, I think, contributed. And I think we arrived at something that really is an inclusive process and reflective of the inclusion that we will have going forward. So I appreciate the enthusiasm. And I see Director Aris's hand is up, and I know Director Watson has something to say.
Can you just clarify, will there be an update on the communications?
Oh, that's a good point. Yes. So communications are driven by HCE in partnership with our communications lead. Our Chief Communications Officer partners with HCE, Janine Thorne. And so you're correct. What we are going to do, I think it'll start tomorrow. There'll be a waterfall of communications, and one will go out that kind of was proposed and I've looked at. It's going to go out tomorrow, I believe, for timing. And then the superintendent search site will be the hub where people can, to your point, go and see what the timeline is. So what we'd like is that at any point, people to be able to understand where we are in the search process. And so that is an understood goal that we are working towards to ensure that there's clarity and transparency in our process. So Director Aris, your hand was up. Go ahead. And then I think Director Watson.
Yes, I just wanted to chime in and say I really appreciate Hank and HCE working with us and really hearing our voices to make sure that we're incorporating our larger community in this process. I understand that 15 is what you've done in the past, but really hearing us and expanding that to 60 and working with our communication department to make sure that we are as transparent as possible and doing a good job of communicating with our larger community of the whole process and engaging them as much as possible. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you. Director Watson, if you have a few words, go ahead. If not, no worries.
I have much to add, but I'll endorse what Jane just said, that I'm actually very pleased with the way the process is going and the plans for the future.
Okay, so with that, we thank you, Hank. You too are welcome to stay with us for the rest of our board meeting, but if you don't want to and want to go to bed, go ahead. Thank you. Thank you again. Okay, I think we go to item 5.2. It's a discussion of our upcoming school visit dates. And we're not actually doing this for approval, it's just for discussion, I believe. And it's for information. So what you have are the proposed schedule for upcoming school visits. You'll note, and I think this was in response to asks by the board, that we start with our virtual academy, which I think we need to have the name updated. But other than that, we are hoping to have that early. And so that is what we front load with this year. Are there any comments or thoughts about what's proposed?
That'll work great for me because I might actually be out of town in September, so I can do the virtual academy visit seamlessly.
Are there other comments or thoughts on the proposed schedule?
Two quick things. So thank you for including the virtual academy. That was a request and I appreciate it. The second is just, will they all continue to be offered online as well, both for us and for stakeholders to attend?
I think the answer is yes, but I would probably have to look to Executive Director Harrison. Okay, so I'm getting a thumbs up, but I know that was the ask. I think, and I think that's always the plan. I think the one piece we have an opportunity to maybe finesse is sometimes when we try to go look in the classrooms, that is not always, I would say, the most elegant experience. So that's a piece that's a little tricky, and I think we still have to maybe work on.
Okay, and then the one other point is we've had really mixed results in the last few visits with parental family participation, and it's brought out a lot of the challenges in returning from COVID and coming back to in-person schooling and how the relationships are managed, especially as administrative changes happen and PTSA participation and other organizations have changed. Is there anything being done to actively increase the value of these visits and the access of these visits for a greater swath of the families? I think that if we're going to do these, I'd like to know that there's an investment made on that side as well.
I don't think we've had any active sort of focus on that per se. I know that we have had a commitment to convey to our principals that we'd like to make sure that they notify in advance our PTSA leads, as well as other members of our community, knowing that not everybody is a member of the PTSA. What I think we can't control is there was at least, one situation where I think parents wished not to come, and some parents made a point of letting us know they chose not to come to make a point, and sometimes that happens too.
What I would say in the last three visits that we had three visits that we did April, May, June, after a period of time where we didn't have the visits because of the Omicron variant. And that first visit, we didn't have any parents, and we were, surprised. The second visit, didn't anticipate that we wouldn't have parents again. We only had a couple, and we were really surprised. The final visit at Bennett, there was an intentional outreach to PTSA and a wider swath of parents to ensure that we had parent participation, and we got that parent participation in June. So that outreach will continue into the new school year.
That would be awesome. And also if there could be intent, I do not know with what intent that was done, but something that really ensures the diversity of participation and making sure that we have the appropriate translation services not only available, but that we have decided ahead of time what it looks like to integrate those into the process. Like, are we doing it real-time stoppage? Are we having that person sit with other people? How do we make it feel most inclusive and most effective? And are we all on the same page about that?
I think those are all good points. And I think Executive Director Harrison, if we can, in the planning, kind of follow the same map we did for Bennett, I think that would be good. Sort of letting them know the PTSA is necessary but not sufficient. We know it does vary by school. Okay, so with that, if there's other input on the school visits, I think we should definitely let the superintendent staff know, but otherwise I think that's going to go towards being finalized. I think we now go to item 5.3, which is the board's review of its proposed budget. And oh, I see a hand up. Director Aris, do you have something on 5.2?
Yeah, I do. I noticed that at some points we've had to ask to see the special education room. I would love it if we could include that on a more regular basis.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. Executive Director Harrison, is that something we can ask?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We go to item 5.3, and this is the board budget. I believe our board coordinator, Hannah Worth, worked on this, I think, along with our deputy superintendent, Alyssa DeVita. So Hannah was thinking she might have the chance tonight to speak to this. Would you like to do that, Hannah? Or however you're comfortable. You mentioned you might like to take a crack at it, and it's totally up to you. It's really FYI across our past and current proposed budget.
Thank you. I will defer to Deputy Superintendent DeVita.
Good evening, board. Thank you for that. So your budget for 22-23 really is flat in comparison to last year. There's no increases anticipated in it. What is included in there is some money for food and or other things at events that you have. That's $1,200. Supplemental pay for board directors. That's the $5,000 that you approved a couple years ago if the board directors so desire. And it applies only to our new board directors because that was the stipulation in the vote that you had. Some general supplies, the contracted services and the travel are the two biggest items. The contracted services are for two basic things. One is your WASDA dues, and the second one is board development costs. So those two come together, and then you do have a relatively large budget for travel in case you want to go to meals, conferences. In the past, board directors have gone to meet with our legislators in Washington, D.C., for example, or WASDA meetings over in the Spokane area. And so that is in there to cover those things. And the total is $76,000, almost $500. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. There's a question from Director Chu.
I have a very specific question. I probably should have asked ahead of time, but I'll just throw it out there. I have been waiting to go to the Federal Relations Network conference on our district's behalf to do some advocacy, particularly for things like meals and connectivity issues and special education funding. And of course, we didn't go 2 years ago, and then this past year, it seemed not necessarily advisable to travel quite yet. So I wondered if this would have enough funding to fund that trip this year. I just want to make sure. And also, it looks like we're not much over what we were 2 years ago, but we didn't go to Spokane, but we are going to Spokane. And I think that's all covered here because we had a $20,000 excess that we didn't spend that year. So is
Correct.
Spokane covered too?
Correct, yes. And so there is room to go to Washington, D.C. For advocacy, and there is room to go to Spokane as well.
Thank you so much.
Sounds like a win. So I do want to also just say on the call out, it's under a policy for compensation for our new board directors. I think I know I emailed our board directors about it, our new ones, and I think I would just encourage consideration of that. I think it can really help model for potential future board directors, just that opportunity. And it's intended to just defray expenses. But Director Aris, I think, had something maybe she was going to say, but I'm not positive. I'm not sure if I'm reading her face right.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had a question regarding, I know that there is obviously the state conference for the board directors, and there is one for the nationals, which I heard about this past year. Is that something that our district directors attend? And if will that be covered?
We haven't attended the national conference. I think Lynn might have gone, but that might have been when covered by WASDA because she was an officer. And I think that maybe back in the day of Peter, totally blanking on his name. But anyway, he represented two. But it's been a while since anyone here has gone to national. And I've heard that the conference content is excellent, but I don't know that this budget is set for it. And I didn't check where it was next year.
Maybe that's something we can explore so that I'd be happy to talk to you about that, just so that if we make adjustments, we can have it in mind for the calendar year 2023.
Absolutely.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, so thank you. Thank you for that, Hannah and Melissa.
Do we need to pass it? In the past, we've actually voted on it. I don't know if you were planning to vote on it or just make it
It
part
was
of that.
just for discussion, so I probably would wait until our next meeting, which is on the 18th. When we do the broader budget. We're planning to pull this forward too. Okay, so we now move to board business, and we are pretty much within time. And so we ask Executive Director Harrison, we've got a couple policies that are up for first reading. You took some of our questions. There were a few questions that we had on our meeting, our planning session earlier this week, and you took some of those, and I think you might be able to address an overall context for us, and then maybe take some specific questions about just language. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you, President Serafan. So a couple of points before I start. One is at your request from the last school board meeting, Hannah posted the schedule of policies when they come before you. So that calendar has been posted to board docs at your request. The other document I want to reference, because I did something a little bit differently for this batch of policies, is the memo to the board. There was a real through line here, and there's more than a couple of policies before you tonight. There's five policies with revisions and one new policy that's being proposed. And the through line for all six policies, the five policies with revisions and the new policy, is that all of the provisions and the new policy 2195, accelerated learning, number one, are all required by recent legislation. And second, what they all have in common is that the proposed revisions and the policy language for the new policy is all WASDA model policy language. So I would say that that's the overview. And just to kind of go down the list, and what I did in the policy board memo for you is, oops, lost my document here. Bear with me. Is I listed each of the policies, and I provided you with the legal reference, the RCW, the specific RCW or RCWs or WAC that necessitated the change. So the first one is sexual health education. There are some minor revisions required there. Policy 2108, the learning assistance program, a couple of minor policy revisions there. 1822, which is training and development for board members, same thing, a couple of minor revisions there. And then policies 3421, student behavior, corrective action, and interventions, and policy 3122, excused and unexcused absences, have more substantive changes. Again, the commonality is that all of the changes are required by law, and they're all based on WASDA model language. And for those two policies, I have invited a friend. When I talk about unsung heroes in an organization, Mr. Glenn Hasslinger is one of our unsung heroes. So I'm going to ask Glenn to give the overview for policies 3122 and 3241 when we get there, because he's very knowledgeable about those changes. So with your permission, President Serafan, start with 2125.
Please go ahead.
Okay.
So that is on item, I think, 6.2, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's the first one up. Thank you. Did you want?
The marked up version, Jess, if that's okay
Yeah.
with you?
Okay. Yeah, it's included as an attachment, and so it's you'll see it under 6.2. It says 2125 marked up.
Thank you. While Jess is getting that up, I think I can start. Recent legislative change here, and this legislation actually got quite a bit of attention in the media around comprehensive sexual health education. And basically, what's changed is that comprehensive sexual health education is now required, and the focus K3 is on social emotional learning, and that comprehensive sexual health education instruction happen in grades 4 through 12. So what you see is the proposed revisions to bring us into compliance with the new legislation, along with a link to the OSBI manual and instructions that are provided to assist school districts in the red font. And I'm happy to answer any questions directors may have.
I don't have questions on this policy. That is, I didn't have questions on the edits, the reason for them, or an issue with the phrasing. Was there a board director who had a question or wanted to discuss? Director Chu?
I think you did a great job with this this update. The question that I have, I didn't see a specific critical criteria review. So one of the things that came to mind because of the language that was added in here and how of it being very inclusive was, do we have appropriate adaptations for different populations of students, particularly those receiving various special education services? And just like, what does it mean for us to be inclusive, and how did we review that? Because I think you guys did a really thoughtful job on the policy. I just wanted to understand how you checked that, and if there was some way of including a check with our stakeholders who are impacted.
Yeah, there wasn't a check with stakeholders simply because this comprehensive sexual health education, as prescribed, is prescribed by state law. I would concur that the language is inclusive, which is really nice to see. And that's another through line through, with a lot of the legislative changes that are precipitating changes in policy. Inclusion, I think, is a through line, as well as kind of equity of access and that kind of thing. So I'm proud of our legislature for the direction that they're going. So I know that our curriculum developers are aware of the challenges with implementation. Specifically, I can't tell you tonight. I can look into it and get more information later about how we're doing that. But I know that that is in fact happening, and that because these were legislative changes and came from a place of equity and inclusion for the most part. That is why I didn't do a specific critical criteria. It didn't seem.
Yeah, no, John, I don't intend to put you against the wall on that. I'm more interested, like the board said that we would really commit to following through on critical criteria reviews. So I do want to think about them, but we've also decided that in order to keep up with legislative changes, when we make surgical changes to the WASDA policies or to our policies based on WASDA and state regulations recommendations, then we generally might not do a comprehensive review. However, I think that, as you pointed out, the through line on a lot of this is changing language to make things more inclusive. And we all know that changing policy language doesn't really make a change unless there's corresponding rollout, like implementation changes. So I think maybe my question is more for the superintendent about like, how will we get to, in the end, see some of the broader level of inclusiveness that these policies are trying to promote where does the board get some insight into how that's going, as opposed to necessarily a review per se of it, but some insight into it? And are there adequate resources allocated to actually execute on what's articulated in these policies? Because as I think about it, truly inclusive sexual education, like, it's more than a single standard curriculum. Like, there are a lot of students with a lot of different needs and a lot of circumstances, and I didn't know, yeah, what we have for them. But the other policies have other implications of their inclusivity. So, is that something you think that we could get insight into over the course of the year, or how can we see
I'm not
that?
really sure. Sorry, so I'm curious. Is that a question for, you're asking the superintendent to answer that?
Redirected
Because
that to the
just wanna ask-
superintendent, and I think it
Yeah.
doesn't need to be answered on the spot. I think
Yeah.
it's more like,
Okay.
we don't have evidence that we've done a whole stakeholder review. There are changes here about inclusivity. So in terms of, like, we as a board have agreed that we'll make sure that the critical criteria are attended to. So I'm thinking out loud with everyone about what that might look like for these policies, because the intent of them is to increase inclusivity, or that's one of the pieces of intent. And I don't know how to see that happen and to make sure that that happens. And we don't have that described here.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, but I want to defer the superintendent, is that's part of what we're trying, saying that's what we're trying to do before we get to our meetings, is know what those questions are, so we could get that answer tonight rather than in the future. So wherever we can, if we can use our pre-board meeting session for those questions, or if they don't come in time, later that night or something, that would allow us to have a ready response tonight. But just, it's an FYI, I know it's summer, so just trying to remind, but I think the superintendent heard the question, I think.
Just a quick, I think you just stated it, but we will make reference to, we'll make note of the interest of a board member in those areas, so that as this is implemented and developed, we're aware that that would be something you would be interested in seeing and hearing. But I won't try to do anything specific in terms of timing or process.
Yeah, no, I don't think that a deep dive for a single board member on a topic, but I think that it would be great if we could think together at some point, not tonight, about what it means to, if we've changed all these policies to be more inclusive, what are we doing? Like, one of the parts of the critical criteria besides stakeholder checkpoints is having data checkpoints. Did we actually accomplish what we were setting out to do? Were there any unintended consequences? And I don't see anything being presented for us to monitor that, to make sure that these changes are being implemented from policy the way we hope. So with that missing, I think that as a board, it becomes more than the individual interest of a particular board member in a particular policy being rolled out. So I wanted to call that out, and I think that the lack of critical criteria review on something, like, I think we should think through what it means to have a targeted piece of the critical criteria or something for this sort of item.
I think the only question I have is if the change to policy is required by law, and we do a critical criteria review that would lead us to say, we don't think this is going to be a net benefit, what different action would we take? That's my main question. I'm not suggesting that's not something we should do because it's an opportunity, but I think one could imagine a scenario where we've got to make a change quickly, and to do either the data-based or stakeholder-based review will either not be done well, or we may miss compliance. So
Totally
that's
agree
what I'm
with
asking.
that. That's why I'm suggesting that if you look at our critical criteria review, one of the columns is about looking forward. So you identify the things that you are worried might not be tended to, or you identify the things that you want to make sure are tended to. You identify how you're going to monitor that, and then you come back and monitor that. And I think that that piece of the critical criteria review is still legit in these cases that are state mandated, fast turnaround, but we still want to make sure that we actually got the intent, not just the letter of the law, but the spirit for our kids.
I would just like to make a comment of encouragement because this is a hard won and long negotiated policy. And I can remember 15 years ago being with this state PTSA, having meetings on trying to get the words sexually accurate and medically accurate entered into this on the state level. And so I just want to comment that this has not been an easy policy to work on. And I also, particularly in this version, appreciate where we have the providing electronic access for the parent review, knowing that we have so many different parental opinions on how this should go, that the fact that they can see it and have some control over it is to my mind, great. So thank you.
Okay, I'm going to thank you and ask if there's no other questions, we move to, I think, item 6.3, which is 2108.
2108, correct. Thank you.
I think again, yeah, great. The marked up version is probably better. Thank you.
Yeah, so the bulk of the change, the totality of the change is really in that first paragraph, where previously learning assistant program funding and focus was really focused on students not at standard in ELA and math. The change is really to be more inclusive and more flexible, and basically broadening the definition of students not meeting academic standards. So it now states means students with the greatest academic deficits and basic skills as identified by statewide school district assessments, other performance measurement tools. So it's a broader, more flexible definition and a way to ensure, from my view, that more students, that all students who need additional support get it. And so that's why when you look at the selection of students section, all of that is now null and void based on the new definition. So in a nutshell, that's the required legislative change in 2108.
I think Director Watson might have, or I thought she had a comment on 2108. Go ahead.
I have something on 2108, if that's okay. Yeah. So for me, when reading this, it sort of, to my mind, went from saying you kind of had to be failing to saying you had to be struggling to meet. So I thought that was good. But I do have a question from the special needs community, and they just want some information and knowledge around, does this affect kids qualifying for an IEP? I know this is addressing a state thing, but there was concern that somehow this policy would interact with being able to qualify for your IEP.
Deputy Superintendent Collins, my understanding is no. I mean, there are learning assistance dollars that are provided to districts to ensure support for all students who are, struggling academically, more broadly defined as of now. But I don't believe that excludes students with individualized educational plans. Director Chu?
I think Director Aris might have a question. I'm not positive. If not, I can go to, Director Chu, go ahead.
The question was answered.
Thank you. Thank you. No problem. Director Chu?
My question on this one is the broader inclusivity of it. Does it come with funding? Are there funding implications of this? Are we in a position to execute on this? Is this something we need to lobby for in some way?
There are funds. I'm not certain whether there's an increase or decrease in funds. They're based on enrollment. But in terms of anything that we need to do to change the services that we're providing, I don't believe so. So does that answer your question?
Let me ask it really straightforward. Just, do we have adequate funds to make this adjustment as stated in the policy?
That's a really challenging question. I mean, I think my view is that we could always use more funds. I have not heard that our learning assistance dollars have been a challenge to do the kind of work that we've been doing and the programming that we've done using those LAP dollars. I've not heard that. I've not heard that this would be a challenge moving forward.
Well, maybe another variation on that theme. Is there an opportunity, I think I'm connecting dots, that Director Chu and Director Aris work together on legislative advocacy? What I'm wondering is maybe she's saying, is this a path that would be worthwhile to go down? Maybe if unlocking revenue that might be appropriate for us to get would allow us to actually deliver fully on this policy.
I think
additional revenue to support these types of programs is always welcome.
Right.
We can take that up in the next time we meet with that group, and I'll bring it back to the board. I just wanted to see, because it is like, it's a pretty inclusive change. It's nice.
Yeah, and next month you're going to, our annual summative report. We're going to report on our data, and there's some good news, and we've got some significant challenges that we've always had, but the pandemic has only kind of increased the challenge that we have. So, absolutely, we could use more support.
I guess what I was curious about is, because it was required through law, does that give us a basis to say this otherwise is like an not unfunded mandate, but not fully funded? And so now we've built it in our policies, we've done our part, but we can't fully roll it out without the funds.
It is not fully funded. They didn't fund the cost of training for all of our staff, and so that is definitely an opportunity.
And Deputy Superintendent Collins, did you want to add to this?
Just that the LAP funds, think of it as, we have Title I is federal money, and LAP is our state money, and it funds particularly focused on literacy for students. And we tend to put most of the LAP funding at our elementary schools, but some years we have spread it out across all schools. Some years we've really focused it because spreading it out doesn't do enough for the kids in greatest need. And so we combine our funding, Title I, LAP. We have focus funds that we have in our contract with BEA that we allocate. And so we look at what are the needs and what are the buckets of money. It definitely comes with requirements and strings attached on things that we can do. And there's never enough money, especially for reading. We'd always love to have more money, especially for reading. And like with the K2 initiative, we could use more money. And all of our schools would like to have a LAP facilitator. We've had people come to the board and address the board and saying, we all need a LAP teacher. And they are impactful when we have these great reading teachers at our schools, and all of our schools could use that kind of support. So it's not really enough to go around to all of our schools. And so we concentrate it at the schools with greatest need, but there are needs at every school, if that makes sense.
I see a question from Director Aris. I'd like to take that, and I think Director Watson I was wrong. Okay, not on this one. Director Aris, go ahead.
I appreciate the changes in this policy, but it does bring a question to my mind as far as you stated, Dr. Collins, is that there's a need at all schools. And with that, there's always a limitation in the funding towards this program and trying to meet all the needs. I'm assuming that there's going to be some changes in the procedure and the way the funding will be distributed. But you have also stated that there is definitely certain schools that has a greater needs than others. I hope that you're going to have a larger discussions with those specific schools and the staff there before you move funding around and weaken the program, trying to meet the other. I'm stating this with knowing that we will have attrition in the future, and funding will be a challenge. And so, but as we have seen that there is a greater need in certain within certain communities, and those are often our schools that has less support from the larger, I guess, community funding. And so I want to make sure that we don't accidentally diminish that support. So I would really appreciate if we're making policies or procedure changes that we are thoughtful in that process.
And that's a really good point. Part of the legislation, actually, there's a new framework that districts are required to use, but the state OSBI provided and the legislation provides for a 2-year period by which to ascertain and figure out exactly how that framework will be implemented in each district. So that, according to Executive Director Edlund, is going to be the work this year.
Great, thank you.
Okay, we move forward in going to item 6.4, which is 1822, and that is regarding actually training and development for board members. The timing was great because I thought it was helpful to ensure that, and we can discuss it in director discussion, that in planning, for example, our retreat, as well as the board planning, the development of the board development plan, it was helpful to be able to see what's in here. So, but go ahead and give the overview.
So the overview is sort of in 2 parts here. The existing language is fairly broad. It recognizes the need for and training for board members to enhance effective governance. There's always been an open government training requirement, and this is the language from the WASDA model. And I felt that it was time to include that specificity in your policy here for 2 reasons. Well, the legislative change provided a bit of an opportunity, and that's the second part. Governance training, beginning with the 22 calendar year, each member of a board of directors will complete governance training program once per term of elected office. And the specificity is that training must be aligned with the cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusion standards for school director governance developed and provided by the Washington State Directors Association. So I thought, since that legality piece, the policy needs to be updated. It also provided an opportunity to provide the specificity that the law provides, that each director receive open government training. So those are the 2 components of the proposed revisions to 1822.
I see a question from Director Watson. Go ahead.
I don't believe that Director Watson is aware that she's muted.
Oh, yeah, I was muted. Oh, sorry. How well defined is the governance training or explained? Because I was told at the last WASDA meeting, Christine and I were both in a session where we did an introductory sort of equity training, and we were told it was part of like a bigger series, and there were going to be quite a few number of hours required. But I don't know for sure that that's what this is referring to here. The governance training with cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusion standards for school. Is that
I can speak to this, Carolyn, a little bit.
And also, is there like a procedure with this that would like spell that out? Because it was quite a training requirement, quite a number of hours and different things you had to do.
So I can speak to it a little bit.
Okay.
I think the language here is awkward. I don't think it makes it clear. It implies that this is a governance training, and I certainly didn't feel like, did you feel, I guess it was a governance oriented training, but it was
one and the same, or is this just like a totally different thing?
This is that requirement.
It is, okay.
This is the diversity, equity, inclusion requirement by the state.
Okay.
The state has also made a very, very narrow space for how you can fulfill that. So if we just tried to sort of keep with what we thought this said and we did our own, I don't think it would count.
Yeah, no.
So we do have to take those. WASD is rolling out another 4 courses, I think, at the annual conference this year. So we should be able to, if you got the first one, you can go take the second one. And I think that they gave time in the pre-conference to take 1 or 2 of those courses this year. So if others from our board need to take it, they can do that, but it is that training. And I don't know, John, I assume that this is WASDA language that you used, but it feels really awkward and contrived, almost as a way of making it palatable to all districts or something. And that's what my thinking is.
Yeah. It is the WASDA language, but the WASDA language very closely follows the language in the legislation.
I was going to chime in and identify that the language is actually coming from the Senate bill that's cited at the bottom with the legal reference. So the RCW that's identified below. And just for clarification purposes, the open government training has been a requirement since 2014. It's just rephrasing what had been the prior requirement.
Yeah, and I thankfully did it at the last WASDA.
And you can also do that one online and then just report to Hannah which date you took it or something. I have one other comment on this. I'm not going to propose that we change the language, but it does sound very political and it is obscure. It does obfuscate kind of what we're trying to do. So I don't know that we need a procedure for it, but we should make sure that we have a tracking for it at the very least. And that the board, just some kind of transparent tracking, like who's taken what, when's your last time, when do you have to take it again, that sort of thing.
I think we could usefully have a procedure that would spell out what that requirement in the course sequence was for that second piece, the governance training. Because I can't even remember what it was, but I remember it sounded complicated and it was going to take some effort.
If you're going to bother to do that, you probably do it for the OPMA too, letting people know how they can fulfill that. So I don't know if we need that or not, but I certainly think we should be tracking these two things. But my other comment is, do we want to say more in the first paragraph at all about our own commitment to board development? Because I think we're all very committed to it and we put a lot of time into it and a lot of thought into what we want to do. So I just wondered if when we were touching this policy, we want it to truly reflect our values as a board. I didn't go and write a suggestion, but.
My thought, and I'm welcoming the input of others, that might be a good place for procedure, but the actual policy, I think what I've understood from our prior council as well as current and others is that the general practice is stay as close to WASDA language as possible. And even though there is always an opportunity to say more, there's other places to say it. And I don't think, I am not in favor of making every policy sort of a speaking document on additional things.
I didn't
Our
mean
own,
on like a.
Yeah, but I think maybe on the procedure could fold in both the tracking as well as kind of how often we will, let's say, try to achieve a training and what mark we might try to hit. That would be kind of, it's like the implementation of how we interpret the policy is what's required, and the procedure could be how we actually roll it out, including how we track, as well as what mark we try to hit every year.
And a line that says that we also add some of our own topics.
Anyway, I don't know if there's other comment on that, but I think that would be my feedback. I don't know if I would say in the interest of time, we move forward, but I think the tracking notion feels like it's a good idea for like our procedure could potentially, John, like outline that we want to track by calendar year along the lines of, you know, I think what everybody's saying, which is how do we ensure that if we're ever audited, if we're ever asked, we have an easy way to be able to, or accurate way to be able to say what's done. But that feels appropriate for procedure. And I guess I tend to think of the implementation and what mark we want to exceed in the policy that would go into procedure too. Director Watson, were you about to say something or, okay. Okay, I'm going to go forward to say, let's talk about 6.5 because I see us slipping behind. So I just want to make sure we get through all of these. For me, I had a question about 6.5 and I don't recall, John, if that was something you had answered by email, but it was,
yeah, so
it was, Yeah.
3241, and I believe you might be referring to your question around, does this policy provide an opportunity to reference our commitment to
Restorative practices.
And in fact, that it is referenced, our commitment to that and our approach to corrective action is referenced in the first paragraph of the policy and existing language.
Yeah, but in edits, so there's nothing additional being done. I mean, there's a reference at the beginning that it be
Not
restorative
make any
nature.
other,
Okay.
kept all the changes again to the ones that were required by legislation.
Okay, got it.
So would you like Glenn to walk you through
Sure.
high level the required changes?
Sure, thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Yeah, so the high level required changes in this policy, some of it is on the face just adding some emphasis. So for example, rights and responsibilities now has a section all to itself where it has been in there in the past, but it's now just emphasizing it. There is some inclusionary language in terms of making sure that school personnel are involved and making sure that students are involved. In other parts, in the past, it was community was devoid at the bottom part of the policies, and also making sure that people who are from outside of our district who we contract with also are aware of our policies regarding and procedures regarding discipline and corrective actions. So that's really the mainstay of the changes here. I know that you have a big blue section. That's right in the middle, that rights and responsibility. That's not all new language. That's just a lot of that's reorganizing the language. So it's not completely entirely new. It was easier to take WASDA policy and cut and paste and then try to figure out exactly what exact words.
I don't know if our directors have any questions. I'm going to let them go first. I don't remember if we also had asked you in our pre-board planning about critical criteria review of this one, but so I don't recall if that was asked, but if you have an answer, maybe start with that and then let's go around to board questions.
Yeah, I would just say on the critical criteria review, again, because all of these proposed changes were required, did not do a critical criteria review in any of the policy revisions in front of you tonight, nor in the new policy being proposed tonight. The one thing I would add to what Glenn said is a change that comes at the request of our executive directors of schools around the membership of the Disciplinary Appeals Council. You'll recall earlier last school year, you made revisions to DAC membership to allow for alternates. So every position currently has the ability to name one or more alternates. We did not extend that to certificated administrators, and the executive directors of schools have requested that we provide the opportunity for there to be one or more alternate certificate administrators appointed to DAC. Typically, DAC hearings are they are relatively few and far between, but last year was hopefully an anomaly, but there were times when it was challenges to get school-based administrators available to serve on DAC. So we are requesting that we be able to appoint one or more alternates. One or more alternates.
I will say also that there were, in terms of the critical criteria, there were more changes that WASDA had made that were not legal changes. So I left those out in particular at this point in time until we had the opportunity to engage in that process.
Thank you. I have a question from Director Chu. Please go ahead.
I think I'm going to build on the question you asked. I didn't realize I would, but I am. At the bottom of page 5, there's some language added about the district will periodically review with the participation of school personnel, students, parents, families, and the community, this policy and procedure. And I wanted to know if the procedure had the details of what we were committing to there, as far as who got to participate, how often that would be done, anything about like, so that we would know that that's reliably being done. And I think in terms of the critical criteria, I think that when things are being done at a rapid rate, I mean, I guess we probably at some point should have a collective conversation about this. There may be aspects of those that we can substitute other pieces in for, but I'm not sure like not doing it is the solution. Like, I think that sometimes in some cases, we can take data that we have already collected from our stakeholders to inform the development of a policy that needs rapid turnaround. And then by doing monitoring, we can get that later stakeholder engagement and do that sort of member check. But I think something like this one is really worth it to circle back with the stakeholders, and it's even written into the policy. So how specific is it, and how often are we committing to that? Like, when's the next time that'll happen, and are they going to be part of the procedure for this in the next couple months, or what's the deal?
Maybe something to consider too. I'm going to just tag on and perhaps, again, I think I'll just say these are questions I on this one I could have asked on Monday and didn't. So I will say that I recognize that. But maybe one idea is where a critical criteria review is not being done, when you have the cover memo maybe stating kind of it wasn't done, and the reasons for it, and then the timing of what might be forthcoming and when, at least for me, would be valuable. But I think Director Chu still has an outstanding question, so I'll let you address it or consider coming back with it.
If that piece is covered in the procedure, the details, and when the next time is that we're going to involve the community in kind of updating the procedure and so forth.
Yeah, so great question. So there's nothing currently specific in the procedure, but it can be written in. At this point in time, it is being changed due to the fact that we did have a recent one in the spring through June, where we talked to several families regarding specifically physical incidents, and having, or several people, I should say, including staff members and community members and students involved in that panel. That's not the right word, but where we have gotten suggestions and where we're implementing those suggestions within the procedures themselves. So the idea behind it is on a yearly basis to do that at minimum.
Director Watson or Aris, do you have any questions? Okay, if there's not, we will go on to.
I would just say, Seema, I would encourage us to get somewhat specific about the commitment to that in the procedure, not in the policy. So obviously it's not something we'll vote on. It's just my 2 cents that if that is that important to us, then we spell that commitment out.
And to be clear, it's in your suggestion is in the procedure for 6.5, or you're saying the procedure for the, did I miss what you were saying? Are you saying spell it out in
3241, yeah.
Yeah, okay, got it. Okay, so what I suggest is you're coming back with a second reading. I believe that second reading is in September, is that right? So if there are questions that were asked here that you're gonna think about, and they may, I mean, you heard sort of what I would call input on these policies, which could also be, so you're taking them down, just to kind of throw that out there, you're taking them down. Board directors can also, if they like, send you a red line or propose comment, as you invited us to for the first readings of the ones we saw on July 21st. So I think that is also something that each board director can do, so that when you bring your second reading back that Monday before, maybe you can also have some of the input, the requests such as Dr. Chu made, and we can, in our pre-board planning session as needed, discuss some of that. I think that would be a good way to ensure that what was said verbally, as well as what any board director might send you before you draft the second, your second reading version, incorporates, or at least you have addressed sort of some of the questions that you heard. that fair?
There. Yep.
Okay, all right.
Absolutely.
There is a comment or question from Director Aris.
Would that include the suggestions for changes in the procedure? Will we see a draft of that? No? Okay.
Okay, so meaning the only thing you're doing at this time is the actual part because it's what's required. Correct?
The question to procedure is the policies of the board's purview. So in reference to Director Aris's question, my answer is you wouldn't see. So let me rephrase that. Your policy that dictates policy development indicates that when there are changes to procedure, that once those changes have been made, you are informed of those changes at the board meeting following when those changes have been made and posted to the website. So that's why I answered no to your question. Is that more clear?
Yes, I was just curious as to how or when we would see some of the inquiries that Director Chu and have made, especially about the timelines and the specifics of the changes and how it's going to be implemented, the community engagement and so on, and how often.
Right, and Director Hasslinger's heard that and is nodding his head that is something that we can include in the procedure. And his earlier answer was an annual. I think you said an annual review, Glenn.
But when we come back before the second reading, and you're addressing sort of, as you did, I think, for some of the procedure, you opened the door, like in our first reading of the batch of policies and procedures. Of course, the procedures already existed for the last round. If a director has or communicates by email or verbally, would you consider this procedure? Then maybe at least that we can close that loop of at least a response.
We can certainly.
When we have the discussion before the second reading, at least then we're clear about where we stand and we can go from there. Yes? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Thank
think that the thing with the procedures that Carolyn in particular has been thoughtful about asking for procedures to be provided. Sometimes they help us give context. Other times the other thing that they can do if there's updates being made to them is to show whether or not the policy itself is going to lead to an implementation that is what was intended. And so like if we see the procedure update and we're like, oh, no, that isn't at all what we intended to happen with this policy, then we can, before we pass the policy, make an adjustment to the policy. I don't know if that's so much the case here. I think it really is a procedural element. But I think it's often a valid just ask to see if something's being updated to share with us. It's helpful.
Yeah, and I think, and as President Serafan said, we opened the door last meeting, and that was because they're two brand new policies. So I felt that for context, it was important that you see the procedure. But in with relation with respect to this one, I think reporting out the intent or the actual changing of procedure based on the conversation tonight is something that we can provide you, as President Serafan has indicated.
Okay, I'm going to, in the interest of making sure we have some time left for director discussion, I'd like to go to 6.6, our first reading of proposed, or 6.6 on the excused and unexcused absences, because this one I think, despite how it's framed, is really about mental health, and I think it's worth sort of just a discussion. If there's a board director who did not get heard on a prior policy, tell me, but I think I did pause and I think I covered it. So I'm going to go forward to 3122, please.
And I think just very quickly, Glenn, you can add to it if you want. I think we can cut to the chase, so to speak, by saying there's two substantive changes here. One is around definitions of an absence. Given our experience with COVID and in-person learning, we now have a definition of in-person of absence from in-person learning. That's number one. And then number two is the piece that President Serafan has referenced there. Mental health is now included as one of the reasons for an excused absence. So Glenn, I don't know if there's anything in addition that you would add as important for directors to know
Well, I think the other thing that's important that is if, so you also will see a definition of what means to be absent from synchronous, asynchronous learning,
Correct.
which is state. And also, since we did go through the pandemic and closure of school, that now there is procedures around attendance for any time we will need to potentially close school due to natural disasters, other future medical issues that may come up, or even current if COVID rears its head again. So I think, and there's also a section in there, I think, that deals with a multi-tiered system of support that is developed as well. There's some technical changes too in terms of number of days, in terms of what constitutes a truant student as well. But those are all implemented in there.
So I guess I have a question, and then I think I know the answer, but would like to frankly make sure I'm reading this the way you see it. And then I think I have a question from your body language. I think I've got a question coming here. But so for context, for other board directors, there was a group of students that contacted, I think either me or Executive Director Harrison or both of us, and we talked to them, I think right at the beginning of the summer. And it was about this question of just the challenge of feeling like they were falling apart, but didn't have, their mental health was not always seen as sufficiently, I guess, valid, a reason to be able to say, I just can't be present for school and have it be excused. I think what I recall, and I was frankly trying to find my notes and I couldn't, but what I recall was they were saying that they got the impression that unless they had something physically they could show, or that essentially most teachers questioned whether they were just trying to skip school for self-serving purposes, which only added to their sense of mental stress. So so that's for context. My question, I think, is I look at the following are valid excuses for absences. The definition of that being modified as what I would point to these students that would say, this is, this is how this is now expanded. But I would love to know if they come back and say, but I don't really know if that will be accepted. Do you have any thoughts about how this helps us there?
Yeah, so let me be frank and honest with you. This is brand new in the state, and there is a conference that a webinar that I'm attending on August 23rd to help me understand what the state intends behind it, which will also potentially, I'm going to be drafting up some new procedures as well. I will probably put those out, but I may revise those once again once I attend that on August 23rd. I suspect that there will be some, much like physical health, there'll be a sort of thumbs up okay if the parent calls and says, oh, they're not doing well today, up to a point where if you have multiple days out, there might be some other need in terms of some other documentation, like we do with medical issues. That's kind of where I think it's going at this point in time.
That's helpful to me. I think Director Watson and then Director Chu. Go ahead.
I appreciate the changes you made towards mental health, but I also want to challenge all of us to think a little bit about sort of equity critical criteria and the situation with COVID contagion. Because what I see here is in that paragraph B under Part E under excused absences, and it addresses elementary. So my first question is, are there similar and parallel rules on the secondary level? And if so, where are they in the policy? Because I can't find them. But if we do just analyze E here, it talks about.
Sorry, I want to make sure I'm tracking. Is that on page 5 or
5? Yeah.
Okay. And Jess, can you adjust the screen too? Thank you.
So we're talking about elementary excused absences, and we talk about you get 5. More than 5 in a month is a cause for concern. More than 10 in a year is a cause for concern. And in these days of COVID, we've all been told that people can go back to work in 5 days by the federal guidelines, but there's also talk that that's for adults going back to work. It doesn't really, you can be contagious for 10 days, and you know how kids are with viruses and stuff. So we could just be counterproductive, passing this virus around, causing everyone to get sick and be absent and teachers out and all that sort of stuff. So I don't know how much of this is state law that you can't get around or whatever, but I want us to just think about it. That are we giving people incentives to send their children in sick and spread virus to others within the school? And I see that the consequences, the conference, which is not required if you have a doctor's note or prior notice from the parent. And that's where I want us to think about the critical criteria review, because that can be an equity issue, taking off from work that you might not be able to get to drag your kid to a doctor that you might not have insurance for, to get a note, you know. So I would like for the second reading for us to really think about the equity issues and think about the sending kids to sick incentives, sending kids to school sick incentive that might be encoded in this paragraph.
I appreciate that. I will tell you that this is directly from law. So this is the way they have worded it. I think the idea behind the conference, which is spelled out a little bit more in the procedures, is really meant around how do we support your student when they're out, right? Is everything okay? We want to make sure that people are okay, that they're safe, that they're supported in their education even while they are out. It's not really, the intention behind it is not to consequence parents. The intention is to hold us as a school system accountable to making sure that we're reaching out and serving students in spite of that.
Do something about making that online or by phone or something, because I'm just thinking about this working parent and this sick kid and all of that. So
that can all be
a way to ameliorate the possible anticipated inequitable things that could happen here.
Yeah, so all that can be addressed in procedure because they can be by phone conference. We did many of those last year.
Okay.
So in implementation, it doesn't necessarily mean you're coming in all the time.
Okay. All right. I just wanted us to think about all that. Thank you.
Okay, Director Chu, I just want to keep people mindful of the time, so let's keep going.
Yeah, I think this is perhaps one of the most significant policies that we're revising, and this is one where I'm not necessarily convinced that the WASR model policy is going to do the work we need. So I have some pretty deep questions on it, and I apologize that I didn't bring them forth on Monday. I, for some reason, have this impression that Monday, since we only have 15 minutes, is really for just questions about reports, and that this board meeting was the place to have the discussion about the policy. So if we're going to change that and do policy discussions on Mondays, then I'll be better prepared for that.
I'll just say that day I said we don't have reports, let's do policies, but the point there is to take questions, but it's not for discussion. So you're absolutely right. Okay. This is the right place to discuss, but I think.
But I could still raise the issues.
Yeah. The idea is in that environment, especially if we've got a detailed question or a question where giving the superintendent or staff a little time, that the value of that is to say, we'll ask you, and then if you needed to do work, you can come back with the answer here. So we don't end up saying we'll kick it down the line for the next
that totally
meeting.
Makes sense.
So
okay.
Just
so the point that Carolyn's making, I think the most important thing is to make sure we're not over limiting what can be counted as the excused absence in this policy itself, that the procedure can give some more space and flexibility for that, but just making sure the language here won't over limit when there are reasons to have greater discretion and greater times for different reasons. But the other thing that I want to ask about is, I'm going to pose the kind of general question first, and then I'll say a few more things. What is the point of us differentiating between excused and unexcused absences? I think that there is a legal point that we are obligated to do so because there's a whole, like, if you have more than 7 and more than 10 and so forth, that we're obligated to follow up on legally. And we should do that, and we should define it clearly. Beyond that, there seems to be research that's pretty clear that the punitive nature of our approach to absences and excused and unexcused by nature of like putting people against the wall and trying to make them defend everything is counterproductive in terms of results for kids. So I'm kind of wondering, like there's things in here where we actually say under unexcused absences that students are expected to make up work. But then under excused absences, we say a lot more about making sure that students are able to make up work. Does that mean we're going to do more for those kids? under excused absences, we have this thing that I think has good intent about how a teacher shouldn't be able to define what constitutes participation, which I sort of appreciate and also think is sort of absurd. Like at the same time, right? We want some objectivity there, but we also, like, we know that what counts as participation depends largely on the activity and all the, like, so many other things. And I don't know that we're going to define that precisely in a policy or even a procedure. So if our goal is to give kids the incentive to continue coming to school, to continue learning, to master their content, I think when we first went through this policy a number of years ago, our intent was to ensure that nothing in here would preclude anyone from making up work, even if they had an unexcused absence. And I think that we should continue to keep that. But I wonder if there should be some reorganization of this policy such that we're very clinical about the excused, unexcused thing, and we track it for the purposes that we do. But then the rest of it be focused a little differently around what do we do in the event of an absence? What do we commit to as a district in supporting our students to engage, re-engage, be connected, be supported, and be accountable? I mean, we do have a restorative justice here approach to things, but what are the things that we want for our kids? And right now, this policy, to me, I'm wondering how it helps us help kids. It helps us be legally compliant, but I don't get clarity around how we're going to help kids with this policy. So maybe you can say a little bit more, but I'm kicking this to you as a consideration for a different approach before second reading, or even some small tweaks that might account for how we can better get this policy focused on doing everything we can to help kids who aren't showing up.
I just want to say, I think there is one hook though with this. I believe, and and others can chime in, but I believe we don't have any like margin on the law, like the whole
No,
notion.
we have no margin on the part. That's why I'm saying
Yeah.
we could be clinical about the part where we have no margin.
Mhm.
And then we could reorganize it or we could leave it organized. And I can tell you the specific places where I think there's some dangers. But my ask is that the people who are experts on, I mean, what Glenn does is try to help kids stay engaged in our system. So how can this policy do a better job of focusing on getting kids to stay engaged and supported in our system and reflect the actual intent of the work that's done on the ground so that we can actually have a more synergistic culture build with our policy work here? Because I don't think this I don't think this policy is great. And, I passed it last time it came around and has a lot of the same language. So it's not a criticism of you guys, but it's an opportunity for us to acknowledge that we know that this continues to be a problem. And the kids who aren't showing up are the kids who aren't showing up. And then they're the kids who get discouraged and they're the kids who end up dropping out and so forth. So I wonder if, and I'm happy to make specific comments to you offline, John, about the places where I think that the makeup opportunities, the purpose of defining participation, et cetera, might be detrimental in here instead of helpful. But I could also just leave it in your hands to consider those comments. And if you have any feedback, I also wanted to bring this up in front of the full board in case others have similar inclinations or feel differently so that we could have a discussion before you take it back.
Yeah, just two thoughts. One, if you can, for all these policies, like you did with the other round, I think you had told us like our due date was basically today for the last batch of policies. If we were going to give you, or maybe it's tomorrow, we were going to give you things in writing. Please give us the deadline by which you would like written comments.
Absolutely.
One thing that you asked, kind of like, what do others think? My 2 cents would be, it could be again in procedure where we implement in places to ensure that we are thinking through how, like, the impact of our distinction between excused and unexcused, which has to be made by law, or our, I mean, we could seek to change that through the state if we think that that's really harmful. But right now, I think we have a requirement to have it be part of a grade, like what's excused and what's not excused. I think that comes from the law. So maybe then in our procedure, we
Wait,
could
wait,
implement
wait, can you
differently.
clarify? We have a requirement to make the absences be included in the
I
grade?
thought that was where it was rooted. I don't know if, I thought the distinction was rooted in law, excused, unexcused, and what impact it's supposed to have on a grade. But I also just want to say, though, if we ask teachers to put in, there may be bargaining effects to some of what you were saying too. So, well, I don't know. I don't know if, I think there could be. So I don't know. I don't know if our general counsel is listening.
I would say that.
Yes. Yes, I am. And I would identify that participation and consideration of participation in grading is an issue that is addressed by state law, and there are certain requirements that must be met before teachers can consider participation in grading. And if there is a change with respect to provision of opportunities for students to do makeup work, or opportunities for students to have that work be graded, it could be an area where the impacts of change to policy would have to be bargained if it's going to be changing the workload expectation on teachers.
Director Aris has a question or comment. Please go ahead.
It's a comment. I think what I heard from Director Chu, and I guess it's my spin or my thought on that, is that I would very much appreciate that besides the legal component and requirements, is that the rest of the policy phrasing is in a way that it's really student focused in a positive language, which encourages those who are reading to see what they can do to help students to re-engage in their education space and not feel that they can't do it, that they're penalized. And I know it sounds very vague, but I mean, it could be interpreted in a way often by educators where they, this is the rule, therefore you're not going to. We don't want, where they just kind of bring it to a negative space where students are disengage. And so if there's any language we could put in there to really help all those who are reading the policies or are in the process of making the procedures, that we do encourage the best positive language possible to see how can we keep the students engaged in a I don't know if I'm clear, but yeah. But I would
No,
appreciate that.
I think you're clear, and I just say, like, this absences, this is one, there are strong feelings and everybody's had experiences, whether it be from an administrative perspective, a teacher perspective, a parent perspective, a student perspective, with the challenges of excused and unexcused absences. But I go to the first sentence of the policy, and it's a revision. Educators and administrators have a responsibility to monitor absences to determine if students and families need support. So the very beginning of the policy starts with that intent. I really appreciate this conversation. It's challenging oftentimes with the legalese that needs to be in policies, but in the procedure, and I always define procedures as the operationalization of the policy. I think that's the opportunity. We the educators in the room, Glenn, definitely agree with the sentiments being expressed tonight. It's really, really good feedback. We'll go back to the drawing board to see what we can do in terms of second reading revisions. But as Glenn has said, the procedures provide a bit of an opportunity. And I would also say we're kind of under a time crunch here because school starts in just a few weeks. So anyway, so I just wanted to kind of put that into the space tonight.
Can I ask one question, just a clarification that follows on Director Aris's point? Yep. I'm not really clear, like if you're a school principal, assistant principal, or teacher, what do you find they are generally looking at? Are they looking at policies to inform what they're going to do? Are they looking at procedures? Like, what are teachers usually looking at when they're deciding their classroom practices? I'm curious if they are getting direction from a principal, or they go back kind of to the original source and say, let me go read the policy. Or do they look at procedure, or do they typically do neither?
I mean, I'll take a stab, and Glenn works very, very close. A big part of Glenn's job is working and advising administrators on these, attendance issues. That's a component of his role. I'd say it would be fairly rare that teachers look at policy and procedure. Administrators definitely. And one of the things administrators do on an annual and an ongoing basis is talk to their teachers about attendance expectations, because we all know that it can, especially at the high school level, it could be a significant challenge. So absences and dealing with absences is definitely a topic of conversation in every one of our high schools, and I would say secondary schools. And so the procedure and policies, particularly the procedure, provides the guidance for principals that Glenn supports on a daily basis. And every one of our schools has an attendance specialist, we call them, Glenn. And Glenn meets with those folks on a regular basis to ensure that they're well aware of the expectations and how we support kids from the position that our attendance procedures are there to support students in their learning, not to hammer them in their grades because they're not in class.
Well, can I ask a question then? If you're trying to, because I think what we're really all maybe getting at is changing culture around like what message gets sent. I mean, most parents don't go look up the policy and procedures. Maybe some do, and many teachers may not. But then there's a cultural impression that gets sent. And sometimes it gets the actual sort of expectations what come out in your sort of curriculum summary at the beginning of the year, or the teacher's expectation. But a lot of it gets just, it gets conveyed by the teacher to the student, or maybe by the attendance person at the school. How do you impact that culture? And I guess that's my question.
So at the beginning of each year, there is information that is supposed to be going out to the families, and that information actually does speak to it's regarding attendance, and it all speaks. And this is part of the law in reality as well, that this letter goes out. And this letter really talks about the importance and the I mean, it glazes over the negative consequences if you don't go in their unexcused absence. However, it talks more about the importance of attendance at school and the realities behind the fact. I appreciated Dr. Chu's comment about unexcused and excused, because the reality of it is missing school is missing school. You're missing the learning, right? And so that letter kind of, in a very short and succinct way, talks about that piece of it and encourages families to the best of their ability to make sure that their student goes to school. Obviously, we have certain things that we're concerned about, COVID. It could be mental health. It could be other things that are getting in the student's way, but to the best of the ability that we work on that. And then it also gives contact information as to who to contact at the school should there a need arise that they need support. And so that letter goes out on a beginning of the year basis. So that's how we start off the year. I mean, that's the point behind that, is that to set that culture of attendance is important. If you need support, please let us know, right? Those kinds of things. Now, we already know that there are many people out there who struggle with their attendance from the year before and have a history. And those are the people that we reach out to prior to, right? Those are the ones that we have active engagement before the school year.
Okay, I think there might be questions from others, but I will just say that I think part of the problem is even pre-COVID, we've probably each heard stories of somebody who, the student either came to school sick because they thought there will be no support for me if I miss, which is a bad outcome, or they felt that they needed to preserve their mental or physical health and felt punished without support. So I think those are the things we're getting at, but did you have something you wanted to ask? Director Chu, did you have anything? Director Aris?
Yeah, I'll add just a tiny bit. I agree with the things that you just noted. I also believe that there are a whole population of students that don't navigate the system the same way that many others do, and that their absences are some of the most detrimental of all. And that is the place where we lose our students, and that's not what we're here to do. I mean, that's why we invest in these positions and these policies. I also believe, I agree with you that a strong procedure and strong communications at the school level, in the end, actually do more, have a greater effect on folks. However, the policies set the tone, and when there's issues, disagreements, or whatever, then people do take out and pull out those policies. They don't read them. They consume them when they need to, more often than not. And when our policies don't have a tone of being focused on students and make it clear that the idea of attendance is to be in compliance with the state and in support of our students, compliance of the law while being in support of our students, or being in support of our students and complying with the state law in that order, that we miss an opportunity to impact that culture in a positive way, and we may even unwittingly impact it in the wrong way. So when we have extended language about all the ways that kids can make up work if they have an excused absence, but we sort of note under the unexcused absence that they can also make it up, there's implications that people take away from that, intended or not, and they read it differently. So that's why I'm suggesting that the policy itself actually has a little bit of space for some thinking from the folks who do it every day. Say, how could we elevate students in this policy while still being in compliance? That's what I'm asking for.
Okay, I'm going to suggest we move forward to 6.7 just so that we don't skip anything tonight. Would you like to speak to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So policy model, the WASDA model policy 2195 academic acceleration has been around for a number of years, and there's actually there's been some funding from the state to encourage things like dual credit courses, and there's been a kind of a push for districts to have a policy in recent years. We in the teaching and learning department never felt the need to ask for our board to adopt an academic acceleration policy, simply because we have been for many years doing everything that the model, the WASDA model policy states. So in essence, this policy codifies what the Bellevue School District has been doing for literally decades. So it basically states that that if students pass the state assessment at the 8th grade level, that they advance to the next high school course in English language arts and math. It also speaks to the science assessment, that if students are proficient on the science assessment, that they be able to access advanced learning courses like AP courses and dual credit college and high school courses. The whole intent is that this is leading students to partake in dual credit college and the high school and AP courses towards the end of their K-12 experience. So basically, what's changed is the law is now requiring districts to have an academic acceleration policy. So what you see in front of you is word for word the WASDA model language, and it basically codifies what the Bellevue School District has been doing for a long time. So that is what you have in front of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions and hear any feedback you might have.
So I see a question from Director Watson. I do want to just note for board directors, we were supposed to be done at 6:45. If I have mutual assent just from the nodding of the heads, why don't we add, I'll say 25 minutes to our time? That would take us to about 7:10, and it would allow us to have effectively borrowed from our director discussion to support this valuable policy discussion. but still have a few minutes to finish 2.5 and do a few other things. So go ahead.
Yeah, my
I see
concern
yes.
is I've been reading this and rereading this and rereading this. And I guess it all revolves around what we mean by, was it next rigorous level or whatever? I don't understand what this means. I do well, I meet or exceed the 8th grade standards. And I go the next rigorous level. Is that 9th grade? Is that 10th grade? Am I skipping a year? What am I doing here? And how does this differ from what we were always doing? I think you were implying just now this is what we were always doing, because if you're only going to the next level, what's the big deal? Why are we writing this? And it doesn't, what my experience comes from international school, where it seems like this is how it is. They only have the one path, and so you meet or exceed the requirements of one year and you go to the next year, unless this is saying you skip a year. I don't know what this is saying.
Yeah, and I would be happy to have Deputy Superintendent Collins weigh in with her historical time in the district and being here at the beginning of the period where we removed gatekeeping. And so
Yeah.
this policy and the push for this policy statewide began a number of years ago, and basically is taking on, and I appreciate this legislation, taking on districts who had gatekeeping mechanisms that prevented access to rigorous coursework. So, for example, things like you need a minimum grade of a B to in the previous course to access an AP course. That's an example of gatekeeping. Or if you were not proficient on the state assessment, you were not able to move on to the next level course. In the Bellevue School District, you talk about one pathway. When we developed our curriculum initially with that no gatekeeping and bringing in expanding our offerings of college level courses, advanced level courses, IB, college and the high school, etc. We backwards mapped from those advanced placement courses and put together a rigorous curriculum at all grade levels. So we were kind of, as a district, pioneers in this regard. And now the state has got to the point where they're saying that every district should be doing, quite frankly, what we've been doing for a long time. So there's nothing in this WASDA model policy that we weren't already doing. So that's why, because I felt word for word verbatim what the WASDA model says is what we would come forward with.
I wonder if
given that we now have to have a policy.
If other parents will read it the way I did and start thinking that their kids need to skip 9th grade math because they did well in 8th grade, the next most rigorous level, what does that mean? So maybe we want to clarify that a little bit. And then, so now I see what you're saying. You're saying that you don't need an A to get to AP. You just need to have met or succeeded whatever the class that came before. Is that right?
Even though we've had this practice for decades now,
Yeah.
Of students advancing, no gates. You can like we've had kids a couple of years ago. I put together a little video and we interviewed kids from Lorinda Flickima's AP Calc class at Sammamish, and some of them said, "I literally flunked pre-calculus, and I'm doing great in AP Calc. I believe in myself, and I'm doing this." And so who are we to say a student can't stretch themselves and have access to that coursework? So we literally, like any kid can have access. But we still find practices that can happen at the school level, at the classroom level, where there is some gatekeeping going on. For example, a student got a C in Spanish 1, and the school enrolls them in Spanish 1 again and says, you didn't, okay, but you only got a C. So this has happened. It continues to happen. And we have to, we don't always know about it. And so we do have to keep an eye on those things to make sure that our students are entitled to the coursework where the appropriate coursework.
And that's where a policy helps us, quite frankly.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That makes it clear. I will ask you to define next most rigorous level so that nobody thinks they're skipping all over the place. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to take a question from Director Chu, and also just remind folks that I'd like to go back to 2.5 because I think we've got the answers, and now that we do, it'd be great to finish that out. And then even just an abbreviated round robin of a short final non-policy based director discussion would be useful tonight. So go ahead, Director Chu.
So going quick here, I think it is deeply ironic that the timing of this, and the reason that I'm going to say that is that on the one hand, the value of this is exactly what Eva and John have been discussing. It is that there are a swath of kids in our district, not just out there, in our district, who are treated differently. And this is trying to press for them to not be treated differently. And for that reason, this is great and we should pass it and so forth. However, two issues. One, I think this needs some critical criteria in terms of how we're going to ensure that the implementation actually pans out. Like just changing the policy. John said several times, this is how we've always done it. And I think in general, people think like that. But as Eva pointed out, we still have occasions or pockets or what have you, where it's not really done like this. The second thing I want to point out is this is actually not terribly consistent with what I hear from our parents in the listening sessions that I went to all spring, and with many, many, many seniors coming out of their programs this year and saying, why did I bother with all this crap? And what did it buy me? And
But by crap, do you mean advanced learning?
advanced classes, like overdoing the advanced classes.
Just wanted to
Advanced
define crap.
classes are- so I think that the crap is not the classes. That is not my intent.
No,
The
it's
crap
the intensity.
is the how did kids, put too much on themselves? How do we as a school district put too much on our kids? And I think that the language in this does concern me a little bit, like talking about the most rigorous, the most appropriate, most challenging, and giving all the kids an equal chance at rigor and interesting access. Yes. Automatically throwing everyone in the highest level of everything they qualify for is how that's contributing to the problems we have in our district right now. That is a huge contributor to what we have right now. So I would actually say that while this policy has value and equity, and we should adopt it, that you might put a stamp of language on it that does a little bit more to acknowledge the importance of encouraging our kids to do this in an equitable way across the board so that all kids have the opportunities. Spell out the equity piece. Like it's not spelled out here, and that's why we're doing it.
That's good feedback.
And spell out the fact that we care about kids' mental health, and we don't think that kids should automatically take the highest level of everything that's available to them every chance they get, because it is killing our kids, literally. And so I see irony in the timing of this policy for that reason, because COVID has really exacerbated all these mental health concerns. So that's my feedback on it.
I'm going to go ahead and say, let's have that be the last word on this. Okay, Director Ars, go ahead. We will run out of time, but please go ahead.
No, I'll just make this really quick because I 100% agree with Director Chu, and I want to reemphasize one of the words that she used is that we need to make sure that we incorporate something of nature that is appropriate to the student, not necessarily the highest rigor, but what is appropriate to the students and both mental and academic needs.
Yeah,
That's great feedback. Thank you.
Completely agree. I want to remind board directors, if I'm understanding Executive Director Harrison, your ask is for any written feedback, whether it's comments by email or if it's a red line, to come in by, is it the 19th of August? That would be consistent with what you had before, which is essentially, or am I wrong, or is it the 12th?
It'd be in preparation for the September 22nd board meeting.
Yeah,
so
for the last one, you had a cadence of about 2 weeks.
I will provide in writing for you this cadence for this set of policies like I did last board.
Meaning like, I need it by X date so that.
Correct.
So
I
that
will
you
do
can
that.
then get us enough lead time before our second reading.
I will do that tomorrow.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to item 2.5. I'm asking us to extend our board meeting by essentially another 5 minutes after the last, so we will end at 7:15. Do do I have, yes, do I have assent? I see a smile from Director Aris. I think that's a yes, and a thumbs up from Director Chu, and nodding from Director Watson. So we go forward. So for 2.5, I think I have an answer that's going to come from Deputy Superintendent Collins, as well as our general counsel. So whoever wants to jump in first is up to you. If I called on the wrong person, you can just come in. Sorry.
Assistant Superintendent Thomas was able to provide the answers to the question raised. Eva, do you want to handle this or shall I?
There's a stampede, but go ahead. You
okay. He reports that the spike in teachers associated with virtual learning was a one-time issue because of the inclusion of Edgenuity teachers, which included teachers from other states who would be certified in their state and had to obtain certification or temporary permits in Washington, and that those teachers had to be included in this report to OSPI, even though they are not BSD teachers. I was correct that this is a one-time issue. It will not be an issue moving forward because the new Bellevue Digital Discovery School is going to be staffed with BSD teachers who are teaching within an endorsement. With respect to is this an unusual number, as Assistant Superintendent Thomas identified that other than the specific group that was associated with the Edgenuity teachers, the number of teachers who were being reported as out of endorsement is consistent with what is typically seen year to year. And it does include things where there were errors in coding of classes, not necessarily a teacher working out of endorsement. When HR provides this information to OSPI, which they have to do by the end of this month, they also have to provide OSPI with a plan that addresses how the district will ensure the concerns that occurred this year will not be repeated, and that all efforts are being taken to minimize the number of teachers who are working out of endorsement, and that we're making sure that courses are correctly coded to align with teacher endorsement.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to at this time call the question back to 2.5 and just ask all those in favor of passing what is listed as item 2.5, which is our teachers identified as out of endorsement for the past school year. Please say aye. And all those opposed, nay.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so item 2.5 passes. We have about 9 minutes for our director discussion. I'm going to kick it off just with, I usually go last, but I think on this time I'll go first, only to kind of say what I thought we would talk more about, but it's fine because I will try to summarize in advance of our upcoming retreat, sort of what are we going to do and how will we use our time. We'll have about 5 hours. It's planned for the 17th of August. It's on your calendar, but we'll make sure you're reminded multiple times so that you know, including the where, and you'll be asked by Hannah soon about food. But we're essentially going to be focusing on our superintendent search, but looking at that through the lens of equity. And it will really be an equity-based, equity-focused and rooted training, but applied to our superintendent search. It will be facilitated by Caprice Hollins, who, if you look back on the board development plan proposed back in February or January, whenever I sent that stuff, I had several names of people who potentially I thought we could work with. Her name was one of them, and two other, along with me, board directors. I liked all of them, but I got 2 yays for her. So we went ahead and with me, that made 3. I think I got a comment from somebody about one of them, but basically that's the person who we went to. She's local and had the advantage of being local as well as well-rooted and respected in the area of equity. She's worked a lot with Seattle School District and is well regarded. So you can see her name, and I think I had some content links to her in what was shared before if you want to look her up beforehand. But there's no homework you have to do before you come, but I think the space will work, and I'm excited because I think this will be an in-person event. So that's kind of it. But
Can you resend the links? And can also, this is not actually on our calendar, at least it's not on mine. So I don't know if I was missed or if it just hasn't gone out yet. I put a hold on that date myself, but I don't have the specifics on my calendar.
Okay. I think it was sent by Hannah, so I don't know. I have hold for board retreat, but I would check with Hannah on that, but I'll make sure if it didn't somehow get accepted up by you, maybe it gets resent, but that's a good call out. Yeah, but that's a good one. But no matter what, we'll make sure that does show up on your calendar. And in terms of resending, maybe I can have Hannah help. It's in the board development plan that was sent in the early part of the year, and you can send that information out. We'll make sure it gets resent to everybody. So it's Caprice Hollins, and I think that'll be nice. All right, I don't want to use up all the time. I just used up 3 minutes. So why don't we go reverse alpha order? Director Watson, do you have anything you wanted to talk about or share?
I can't hear Director Watson.
That's me working on the technology work stream without putting my mic on. We've gotten some information. We've had some meetings where we are going to produce some kind of a document that shows you what's happened. But we've opened up some of the permissions in the SharePoint. We're trying to think of how to restructure the files. We've gotten some input from legal on what we can actually do, and but we don't have it because Joyce isn't here and I was out of town.
Well, actually, I think where you are is you shared it with Hannah and Shannon, and they're putting together the proposal.
Okay.
So I think there's a hand up. Director Aris?
No,
Oh, I'm
she's
wrong.
just waving.
Okay, sorry. Director Chu. I'm gonna
On
try to-
this or on other topics? I think we're almost out of
Anything
time.
you-
I think
on anything, I think.
I'll just save.
Yeah.
I don't think we can have
Okay.
a robust discussion, so.
Director Aris?
I just want to echo that I was looking at my calendar. I have a hold for the 16th and 17th for the retreat, and that's all I have. So if there's a specific time and place, because it says hold for 8 to 5 p.m.
Yeah, no, it's going to get narrowed. Part of
Okay.
the issue was just trying to confirm with the facilitator, Caprice Hollins, and part of it too was it's going to be 3 to 5 p.m. Sorry, 3 to 8 p.m. on the 17th, and that was just to accommodate a particular schedule. I was hoping we could do it earlier in the day. That wasn't possible. The other option with the facilitator was the 16th, and so I reserved 2 spaces, but I couldn't. In the end, she couldn't loosen up her calendar for the 16th. But I kind of had it held just in case she could make the 16th. I don't think she'll be able to, so it's going to be the 17th from 3 to 8. But I didn't quite want to give up the holes until I was positive. So that's why you have that over calendaring.
Some updates.
Yeah, you will, with the specifics and ask about food preferences and all of that. So,
And I will say that there are a couple things that I would like to talk about at some point, not tonight.
yeah. Please.
I would like for us to have another discussion about the critical criteria there that we talked about a little bit on policy with the superintendent, so that we can make sure that we all have shared expectations about what that looks like, and that they're realistic and they're doable and they're productive, and that it sort of fits. And also in that vein, be good to know like how that's working and if it needs any modification, as well as I believe that the board owes its sort of assessment on how we did on our equity goals by the end of August. And so I don't know if you guys are taking care of that, but I want to make sure that doesn't fall through the cracks. And yeah, there are a couple of other things I think that we should think together about, but I'm glad we're looking at board development. And so that's all I'll say for tonight. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to respond to that, I think we've used a lot of our pre-board planning time on the superintendent search, and this last meeting actually went a little bit more on that topic than I was hoping, but I think we landed in a good place. It's all worthwhile. But I think we can use the 15th more heavily on the topic of policy and, working together on that. The other piece I was going to address, but I just literally forgot what I was going to say. So maybe I'll think about it later. Oh, the board development plan. I am going to endeavor to have something, Carolyn's been out, but have something that I can propose for the board to be able to review not later than the 10th of August. I'm going to try to get it to people before then. That is a proposal. I wanted to make sure I incorporated feedback I got from everybody, which was very helpful, as well as just possibilities in light of what we see coming up in terms of our timing of the superintendent search. I think that written proposal, I'm going to try to get it out by the 10th for everybody to review, to have at least a full week before the 18th. So that's the main update, but I'll take what you said and try to incorporate it into the 15th. Okay, I think with that, we're at 7:15 and our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.